They reasoned that a little HOA charge would make I submit to their power hungry. Once not knowing they just chose a battle alongside the chief of cops, yet what? Results when I find they're illegal. Action aiming for the needs of our society. Hardworking first responders and decide. It's time for the hunter to become the hunted. Hello to my channel, comment below from where you are viewing. I'll never forget that morning it started. Like every other day, yet turned out to be altering our entire neighborhood forever. As I walked outside toward my car ready for another day in the police station, I observed something bright green stuck under my window wiper. At first I thought it was just another takeout menu. Yet my heart sank when I learned it was a HOA violation letter, $79 for inappropriate grass care. You've got to be tricking me. I stood there in my uniform, coffee in hand, looking at my yard. It looked exactly like it had over the past 15 years I'd lived here. The grass was green, lush, and just mowed. Sure, maybe it wasn't perfect like a golf course, but it was neat and well maintained. That's when I heard the unique sound of high heels clicking on the sidewalk. Good morning. The voice was honey sweet, yet had an edge to it that made my teeth hurt. Karen Mitchell, our newest HOA board member, was making her morning inspection walk with her tablet in hand. She'd moved in 6 months ago and quickly started lobbying for a board seat. Now 3 weeks into the job, she was making everyone's life awful. Miss Mitchell, I nodded politely, holding up the notice. Mind explaining this? My lawn meets all fair criteria. She barely looked up from her iPad. Section 7, paragraph 3 of the HOA rules clearly shows that grass height must not exceed 3, and yours is nearly 3.5. And she said this while tapping away at her screen, probably documenting another infraction somewhere. I took a deep breath, remembering my training and dealing with nasty people. I've been a bit busy this week with an important case at work. I'll mow it this weekend. Rules are rules, she chirped, finally glancing up. The fine doubles if not paid within 72 hours. Oh, and you might want to do anything about those yard gnomes. They're not on the allowed decoration list. My yard gnomes, the ones my late wife had collected. I felt my blood pressure rising, but kept my voice steady. I wasn't aware we needed permission for garden ornaments that have been here for over a decade. New board, new rules. She waved her tablet happily. We're bringing this area into the modern age. No more tacky ornaments. Decreasing property prices. As she clicked away down the path, I realized she was stopping at Sarah's house next door. Sarah was an ER nurse who recently finished a tough night shift. The last thing she needed was Karen's morning abuse about her waste bins being out too long. I watched as Karen started taking shots of Sarah's place, and something inside me shifted. This wasn't just about my lawn or my fairies anymore. In my 25 years of law enforcement, I'd taught to identify patterns of harassment and abuse of power. Karen wasn't just being strict, she was targeting specific residents. Back in my car, I pulled out my phone and started going through the neighborhood Facebook group. The reports about Karen were piling up. Mark, the firefighter on the corner, had been fined for his kid's basketball hoop. The old couple across the street got a violation for their authorized rose bushes. Even the town teacher had been penalized for parking his car on his own driveway since it was too old and ugly. I was about to pull out of my driveway when I watched Karen taking more pictures of my gnomes. She didn't know it yet because she just made a big mistake. See, becoming chief of police had taught me one extremely important item. Often the biggest crimes aren't the ones that make news, but the tiny injustices that chip away at a group spirit. As I drove to work, my mind was already creating a plan. Karen thought she had all the power, yet she had no idea who she was truly working with or what I would find as I started digging into her perfect facade 2 days after finding that stupid lime green ticket. I couldn't believe my eyes there. They were 2 black SUVs with HOA defense plastered on the sides, absolutely blocking my driveway. I just ended a hard double shift dealing with a bank robbery downtown, and all I wanted was to park my car and get some sleep. But no, Karen Mitchell had other plans. I stared through my window as she strode across my front yard in her designer suit, tablet in hand, taking pictures of everything from my garden hose to my receiving mat. Each flash of her camera made my blood pressure increase a bit more, but I kept my cool. 20 years on the force taught me that losing your fury never fixes anything. Pardon me, I called out when getting out of my automobile. You're blocking my driveway and I need to get to my garage. Karen spun around, her perfectly groomed blonde hair swishing like a shampoo ad. Well, if it isn't Mr. Johnson, our neighborhood's most consistent rule breaker. She tapped her tablet screen. With her big red nails, let's see, unpaid fine for lawn height infractions, banned garden gnome positioning, and now she waited for dramatic effect. Non-regulation mailbox color. I couldn't help but chuckle. Non-regulation address. Color. The mailbox is white. It's been white for the 15 years I've lived here. Accordance to our new rules allowed. Last week all doors must be painted perfect pearl white from the Anderson Paint Company collection. Your mailbox is obviously classic white, a totally distinct hue. She smiled like she just solved a murder case. I pulled out my phone and started taping. Karen, I understand you're new to the neighborhood, but these security trucks are parked illegally. They're blocking access to my home, which is a breach of City Law 2345. Her smile flared for barely a second. I have full authority as HOA board member to enforce our community rules. These security officers, she pointed to two guys in ill-fitting clothes leaning against their SUVs, are here to ensure compliance. That's when I noticed something weird about their tags. They looked almost like real police badges, but not quite. As chief of police, I knew every qualified protection company in our jurisdiction, and Mitchell Security Solutions wasn't one of them. I took a deep breath and decided to try reason. One more time. Look, I get that you're trying to keep property prices, but blocking someone's road over a $79 fine isn't just unfair, it's illegal. I'd hate to have to increase this. Karen's face turned the same color as her nails. Is it a threat, Mr. Johnson? Since I have pictures recording every violation on your property, and the HOA board will be highly interested in your angry attitude. She turned to the security guards. Make a note of his violent behavior. As they fumbled with their notepads, I watched their shoulder patches were falling off. They looked like they'd been printed at a neighborhood copy store. Things wasn't adding up here, and my cop skills were kicking in strong. I picked up the city's business license information on my phone, keeping one eye on Karen as she continued photographing my stuff. 3 taps later, I had what I needed, or rather what wasn't there. No allowed security business registered under her name of her brothers, who I'd seen at the last HOA meeting wearing a similar uniform. Just then Mrs. Garcia from next door came flying out of her house in her nurse's scrubs. Chief Johnson, I'm so pleased you're here. They've been blocking my driveway too, and I'm late for my hospital shift. I watched Karen's face closely as she heard the word chief. Her eyes expanded just little, and her tablet nearly slid from her fingers. But instead of backing down, she lifted her chin higher. Your title doesn't matter here, Chief Johnson. HOA rules apply to everyone evenly today. If you'll pardon me, I need to write a few more infractions before I process the extra penalty for your stubborn behavior. As she walked away, paper clasped to her chest like steel. I knew this was far from over. In fact, it was just the beginning. I had a shock. Karen's perfect HOA world was about to get a lot more complex, especially once I started looking into clear how these new security measures got cleared. I never expecting a simple lawn argument to uncover something so unsettling in our peaceful neighborhood. It started when Sarah, an ER nurse who lives 3 homes down, knocked on my door at 6 a.m., stilling her scrubs and fighting back tears. She just ended a tough long shift, dealing with a bus disaster, only to find her full front yard plastered with bright orange infraction letters. Chief, she whispered, her hands shaking as she held up the stack of papers there, threatening to place a lien on my house because my garbage bin stayed out for an extra day while I was working a double change amid the disaster. The sight of this committed nurse, who recently spent 16 hours saving lives being hounded over trash bins, made my blood boil. But Sarah wasn't alone. As I started inquiring around, additional stories emerged. Mark, the firefighter on Maple Street, showed me citation after citation for his kids' basketball hoop, the same hoop that had been there for 5 years without trouble. Before Karen joined the board, the Martinez family got punished because their Christmas lights stayed up 2 days past Karen's arbitrary date. They'd been at their grandmother's funeral. I sat at my kitchen table that evening, giving out all the worries like bits of a puzzle. The pattern was clear as day. Karen wasn't just being fussy, she was primarily targeting homes where people worked long or irregular hours. First responders, nurses, doctors. Firemen, folks who couldn't always be home to leap at her every demand. My policing reflexes kicked and I started sketching out every citation given in the past 3 months since Karen gained power. The number of breaches formed a clear trend around homes of emergency workers and those who overthrew her during the HOA election. This wasn't chance. This was planned abuse. Then my phone got a text from Tom, my deputy, who lived in the next neighborhood. Chief, you're not going to believe this. Remember that flooding scene last spring? Just found out Karen's brother's company got the deal for drainage repair. Cost 3 times what the other bids. So I leaned back in my chair. Thought about how Karen had laughed in my face earlier that day as I tried to reason with her about my own great rules. Our rules, she'd stated, that smug smile never leaving her face, yet now I knew these weren't rules. This was a power trip, and probably something even more sinister. Just then my doorbell rang. It was Mrs. Chun from across the street, an old widow who'd lived here longer than anyone. Chief, she muttered, staring over her shoulder nervously. I saw them putting cameras on the street lights. Now they didn't ask permission. Karen says it's for security, yet they're all directed at particular houses, including yours. My jaw tightened. Unauthorized surveillance in my area now. Karen wasn't just being a bother. He was possibly breaking the law, but I needed more proof before I could act. If I moved too quickly, she'd play the victim, claim I was abusing my position as chief. As I walked Mrs. Chun home, I observed Karen in her driveway talking to 2 men I'd never seen before. They wore outfits from her brother's security company, but something about them looked off. My gut told me there was more to this story, and in 20 years of policing work, my gut had rarely been wrong. I closed my eyes, recalling what my master used to say: the bigger they are, the harder they fall. Karen had created herself a small kingdom of fear and intimidating, but she'd made one important error. She'd gotten too cocky, too sloppy. She didn't understand that while she was watching us, we were watching her too. The basic question now wasn't simply about stopping Karen, it was about exposing the whole twisted system she'd created. While I looked at the growing amount of evidence on my desk, I knew tomorrow will be a very exciting day at the HOA emergency meeting, especially when they discovered who had just been discreetly nominated to the county's housing authority oversight group. I couldn't sleep that night thinking about how Karen had been treating everyone in our neighborhood. Something didn't feel right about the whole event. While drinking my morning coffee, I remembered an important lesson from my early days as a rookie cop. Follow the money. The security firm obstructing my path had seemed curiously ready to follow Karen's bidding, and their outfits seemed suspiciously new. During work, I asked Jenny from our records department to run a simple business check on the protection company Elite Neighborhood Watch Services. Within minutes, my suspicions got bigger. The company had only been registered 3 months ago, shortly after Karen joined the HOA board. The owner's last name matched Karen's birth name, and the business address led to a P.O. box instead of a real office. I drove by Sarah's house during lunch break. She was just getting home from her hospital job, looking tired. Chief, she called out when she saw me. They left another letter this morning. I can't keep paying these penalties on a nurse's income. She showed me a stack of infraction letters, all signed by Karen, all referencing odd HOA rules that seemed to target working people. Specifically, back at the station, I dug deeper into public records. Karen's brother Tom Mitchell had a history of failed security businesses in 3 different states. Each time complaints had been filed about aggressive methods and unlawful car blocking, but they'd always left before any genuine study could start. My next halt was the county clerk's office. The pleasant cashier, Mrs. Rodriguez, helped me extract HOA registration documents from the last 6 months. Looking over the pages, I found just what I wanted. Karen had never recognized her family linked to the protection company when bidding for the HOA deal. That was a clear violation of the HOA's own conflict of interest rules. But the true gold mine came when I studied Karen's home company filing. She'd been running a babysitting center from her garage, caring for 6 kids at a time. The HOA rules extremely prohibited commercial activities, the very same rules she'd been utilizing to find additional friends for having home offices. Even better, she Didn't have proper childcare licensing. From the state my phone buzzed with a text from Mark the fireman chief. You need to see this, he emailed me shots of Karen security company cars parked in fire lanes around the area. As a firefighter, he knew just how risky this was. We couldn't buy a truck through there if we needed to. His message read, I spend the rest of the afternoon creating my case property maps, showing Karen had extended her back fence 2 feet beyond her property line. Security camera video from my cruiser proved her work had prevented emergency car access many times. The HOA's financial documents showed she'd been asking the board to boost fines while leading all security contracts to her brother's company. The evidence was rising, but I had to be careful about how I utilized it. Karen has friends on the city council, and I needed to make sure everything was entirely legal and appropriately documented. I made copies of every document and stored them in both digital and physical forms. Years of police work had taught to always have backups. Just as I was finishing up, Officer Rodriguez stormed into my office. Chief, you won't believe this. That security company tried to boot Dr. Thompson's car at the emergency room entrance. He was coming in for a urgent operation. My blood heated, but I, keeping my cool, this was the final item I required. I slumped back in my chair looking at the wall of proof I'd collected. Karen had no idea what was coming in her haste to build her little realm of power. She'd left a trail of crimes that would startle even her fans on the HOA board. The real question now was time, when, and how to show this facts for maximum impact. A text message popped up my phone screen. It was from one of my sergeants. Karen just presented a plan for expanded security steps. Emergency HOA meeting called for tomorrow night. I smiled, knowing the right moment had just offered itself. Sometimes the best inquiries are the ones where you let your target stroll right into the trap they've set for those going into that HOA meeting. My heart was racing, but I, keeping my face calm. Karen stood at the front of the room in her fancy suit, waving around a bunch of papers concerning her new community safety program. I watched as she talked about hiring more security guards and putting cams on every street. The whole room looked fatigued of her rules, but everyone was too scared to speak up. I waited until she finished her statement about protecting our property values. Then, just as she sought for votes, I raised my hand. The familiar weight of that badge in my pocket gave me strength. Before we vote, I replied, getting up slowly, I guess there's something everyone needs to know. Karen's eyes narrowed. Not know me out of uniform. I'm Chief Anderson, and I've been investigating some worrying situations. I ripped out my own bundle of papers, property records, business licenses, and pictures. The screen clicked on showcasing Karen's unlawful home business setup, plain as day. These photographs show an unlicensed daycare operation operating out of your house, Mrs. Mitchell. That's against both HOA rules and state laws. Karen's face became red. How dare you? This is private property. Public papers aren't private, I replied, quietly, changing to the next slide. Neither is this business registration showing your sibling owns Safe Shield Security, the same firm, now patrolling our streets without right licenses. The room exploded in whispers. I continued, while you've been locating Sarah Thompson, our neighborhood nurse, for putting her trash boxes out an extra hour after her night shifts, you've been running an illegal business while you cited Mark Rodriguez's kids for their basketball hoop. Your security firm has been running without permits. Mrs. Chun from down the street stood up. She fined me $200 for my Chinese New Year decorations. Others joined in sharing their stories of Karen's targeted abuse. Karen tried to take her documents and storm out, but the HOA head, Mr. Jenkins, blocked the door. Not so fast, Karen. We need to discuss this. I gave evidence of every unfair fine, every made-up rule, and every double standard. The room got louder with each revelation. Parents who'd been for their kids' chalk painting spoke up. Older citizens stated how they'd been bothered about their garden gnomes and bird baths. And here's the biggest difficulty, I said, showing the final slide. The security company has been writing tickets and obstructing roads without any legal power to do so. That's misrepresenting law officers, a serious offense. Karen's amazing mask finally cracked. You can't prove anything. I was making this place better. These people require rules. Rules apply to everyone, I answered, including you. The room exploded into applause. Mr. Jenkins called for an emergency vote and hands. Soared up across the room, Karen wasn't. Just pulled from the board she was. Banned from ever serving again as she. Finally pushed past everyone to leave. She turned back with tears of rage in her eyes. This isn't over, she shouted, but gazing at our united friends, I knew. It was occasionally justice wore a badge. And sometimes it just needs someone to stand up and say the truth. I walked into the HOA meeting room with every piece of data nicely structured in my folder. The room was packed. I'd never seen so many people show up before. Karen sat at the front table tapping away at her tablet like she owned the place. She didn't even look up when I entered. Before we vote on the new security steps, I announced, standing up from my place in the rear, I'd want to address the board. Karen's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing as I walked to the front. For those who don't know me, I'm James Mitchell. I've lived here for 15 years, and I'm also the chief of police for our city. The whispers started quickly. Karen's teeth slid from her hands, clattering on the table. I could see her brother, the security company owner, shifting uncomfortably in his chair near the door. Throughout the past 3 months, there have been 47 penalties given in our community. 35 of them were given to first responders and important workers. I pulled out my first piece of proof, a color-coded map showing every cited home. See any trend? The board members leaned forward, studying the groups of red dots. Mrs. Thompson, our retiring school director and longest sitting board member, adjusted her glasses with shaky hands. But that's not all. I kept pulling out more paperwork the protection company hired to execute these citations. Mitchell Security LLC isn't only illegal, it's operating illegally under our state's private security contractor law. Karen's brother stood up, walking toward the door. But 2 uniformed cops I had stationed outside were already waiting. Karen jumped to her feet. This is ridiculous. You can't use cops tools for personal vendettas. You're correct, I grinned. That's why everything I'm presented tonight came from public records and legal routes, including the documentation showing your home-based enterprise that breaks Section 7 of our HOA deal. The room exploded. Neighbors started sharing their own stories. The single mom fined for Christmas lights in January while she worked double shifts. The elderly couple attacked for their medical tools delivery van. The kindergarten teacher charged for children's chalk drawings on her own driveway. Mrs. Thompson stood up, her voice getting through the chaos. I moved to quickly remove Karen Mitchell from the board and start a complete audit of all fines made under her authority. Second, 5 voices shouted out at once. Karen's face has changed from crimson to white. You can't do this. I was protecting property ideals. I was keeping standards. No, I whispered quietly. You were bullying people. He didn't have time to fight back, but that ends today. The vote was unanimous. As Karen stormed out, her designer handbag spinning madly, neighbors started hugging each one. Other Sarah, the ER nurse who'd gotten 8 citations, was crying as she hugged Mark, the fireman who'd nearly lost his kids' basketball hoop. I stayed late, helping Mrs. Thompson start the papers to refund every unfair fine we found. Over $115,000 worth of awards apiece. One more ridiculous than the previous. As we worked, friends kept popping by with coffee, snacks, and stories of relief. The next morning I drove to work past Karen's home. A moving truck was already on her driveway. Her brother's guard vehicles were gone too, replaced by genuine patrol cars, making sure the relocation firm had right permits. Phrases spread quickly through the neighborhood. People started coming out again. Kids played in their yards without fear of citations, and Mrs. Thompson planned a community cookout to honor the return of common sense. But the best time arrived a week later. I was watering my yard, exactly 3.5 in tall, when Sarah's daughter ran up with a homemade card. Inside was a crayon drawing of me in my cop suit standing in front of a rainbow-colored house. The statement read, "Thank you for making our neighborhood pleased again." That card hangs on my desk at the station now, telling me that sometimes the most important police work happening right at home. Our town learned an important lesson. It's not about having power, it's about how you use it. And as for Karen, last I heard she tried to join another HOA board 2 towns over. But somehow they'd previously heard all about her time with us. The information in this video is for informational and entertainment reasons, because HOA rules and legislation vary by state and community.